Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk about races in Pathfinder. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what we do on this podcast?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. We like to talk about games, I guess. And I guess before we get into that, we haven't done as many updates about our gaming history or whatever. Recently, what have you been playing, I guess, is the question.
Well, I think first and foremost, what bears mention is Hell's Rebels, GM'd by you.
That's true. That is, in fact, being played.
Which I made the tremendous blunder of not recording anywhere, so the first episode's lost the ether. But rest well, dear listeners, for I have fixed it, and we will be exporting the videos to YouTube from here on out.
That is, it's simultaneously good, but also like secretly sad. Like that speech at the end of the session by Barzillai Thrud is like, it's really important to me. Like that was a really big something.
And it was fantastically well done. Like it was perfect for the mood. It was great. And you can't hear it ever, listeners.
It's
Sorry.
True. I'm actually, to be honest, this is like the definition of me playing GMing games and Dungeons and Dragons. Even though I really like that speech, I thought I did a good job and everything like that. It wasn't like quite perfect, and that always bugs me. Like that kind of stuff always like gets under my skin a little bit. Mostly because I had only done it to that music a couple of times, and it was the right music, and I knew that's what I wanted to use, but it really brought the tone like a little too far down. I don't know. Maybe I'm just in my own head about it.
But it was a great session. We did a lot of RP.
Yeah, I have a feeling that kind of thing is going to happen commonly, so to speak. I was not expecting you guys to so thoroughly kind of test the sandbox, but
I think we just had we have like a good group of people for it and a good group of characters for it. Like everybody pretty much, except for maybe Jimmy's character, the Ranger, had like a thing that they realistically would have wanted to check up on after getting out of jail.
Yeah.
Whether it was an affinity to a noble house of some sort or a halfling friend. Which I think
Mara Greg has I really halfling.
Yeah, and I think the mandatory backstory stuff did a good job in kind of fleshing that out a little bit and kind of piquing our interest in that way. So it was a good time. And I'm excited for more of that. Wednesday, right?
Yes, we will be doing more on Wednesday. I feel like this is what I expected to do last Wednesday, but we'll probably be covering most of the kind of like the macro stuff regarding the rebellion and like setting out a skeleton for how you guys are going to want to progress through the first book. Something that I think is kind of important to a certain extent in Hell's Rebels is keeping a keeping like an underlying structure of goals that kind of last throughout the book, so that things don't get because it doesn't have the benefit of being linear in the same way that like Rise of the Rune Lords does, right? Where like each plot point is followed in sequence by another plot point, right? In Hell's Rebels, you've got a lot of like branching missions and things that you could take on kind of on your own time. And so I think having like an underlying structure there to keep everything in line and stopping it from going haywire is important.
Yeah, no, it sounds about right. Yeah, it's definitely great. It's definitely exciting. I'm very much looking forward to it. On kind of the opposite end of that spectrum, I also ran a game of Paranoia this weekend. Not on the channel or anything, with some of my geographically local friends. And that game, man, I love that game. I love that game to death. Which is funny because it is the exact opposite of Sacred Covenant or Sacred Contract stuff that I go on about with D&D. It is very explicitly, just do it. DM, wing it. DM, roll the dice, pretend to consult a chart, and do something else instead. That's kind of like the attitude of the game, and that's why I love going with it. And for those of you at home who are not familiar, it's about a far-flung future where a computer has essentially everybody lives underground, and it's all monitored by a computer who hates communists, and is convinced that everyone's a traitor. And in fact, most people are traitors by its definition, such things as being a mutant or being a member of a secret society, when in fact every character is a mutant or a member of a secret society. It's actually pretty fun. But one of my favorite moment from the session this weekend is so the characters have these things called mandatory bonus duties. And mandatory bonus duty is essentially something like squad leader or equipment guy. And one of the roles is hygiene officer, who's responsible for the hygiene of the team, making sure everybody is up to standards. And so, two of our team members get shot, and the hygiene officer walks up to them and promptly fines them for not being up to hygiene standards for having blood on their uniforms. And that's just like perfect. Like that's exactly what paranoia is, and it was beautiful. Just another little tidbit to kind of like set the scene, like set the kind of idea for this game is like, your character comes with 6 backups. Like it's expected that over the course of one, it's not really meant, or the classic style is not meant for like long campaigns, but for like one adventure, it's expected that you will go through about 6 copies of yourself. And the objective of paranoia isn't necessarily to beat the mission. It is more so to be entertaining and have fun along the way.
Yeah, I like paranoia a lot in the same way that I like, a lot of these kinds of, I feel like there's a lot of like TV shows like that right now. I would call them postmodern TV shows, but maybe that's just because like I have my pretentious glasses on. And I think paranoia very much like wants to exist in that line of thinking, which is what I think, which is the appeal to a certain extent.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's also a space for, especially people who play other RPGs regularly, to kind of do the opposite of what of what they would normally do in an RPG, right? Instead of cooperating, they get to shoot everybody. And that's not only okay, it's encouraged, that kind of thing.
I'm reminded of that. You know that skit from Rick and Morty where he plays like Roy, the video game about the guy's life, and Morty plays it, and he has he has kids, and he goes to college, and then he gets cancer, but he beats the cancer, and then he goes back to work at the family carpet store or whatever, and then immediately afterwards, Rick gets in the machine, and he burns his Social Security card and takes himself off the grid. Like, I think that's a little a nice metaphor for kind of the interaction between paranoia and regular games.
Yeah, that's about right. What about you, buddy? What have you been up to this week?
Yeah, man, I've been playing tons of XCOM. I played XCOM on normal, and then but I was like save scumming really hard, and eventually I kind of got to this point where because I had put off the main story for so long and I had just not done any of it, I got to this point where I was so overpowered compared to what the main story, which I was supposed to have been doing this entire time, what the main story was asking me to do. That I was just like, fuck it, I'm going to restart. So I restarted, and I was playing Iron Man on the easiest difficulty. Because I was like, all right, if I'm not going to be able to save scum, I might as well just play on, like, the super easy difficulty. But, man, the super easy difficulty is so easy. It's, like, not even funny. So I was like, fuck it, I'll pop it up to normal, and we'll just try this again. And then I popped it up to normal, and I was doing pretty okay for a while. And then everything went wrong, and I just lost. So I've restarted Iron Man on normal, and I'm playing through that. But I'm generally speaking making better, better calls, not getting fucked as much, which is nice.
Yeah. I think maybe I felt this way about XCOM Enemy Unknown as well, is that Iron Man's really cool and it is my preferred playstyle, in fact. But I feel like the game wasn't built around Iron Man, and so you feel something like permanently losing a very high level or a couple of very high level soldiers really hard.
See, this is what destroyed me on my first run. I rushed an advanced combat center or whatever, which like made my healing rate super fast. So I was constantly using these same couple of soldiers on these missions or whatever. But what snowballed out of control for me is I just, I procced a group wrong. I got a couple unlucky flanks, a couple unlucky crits, I took some risks, they didn't pan out, and I lost 2 of those really high level guys, and I didn't have anybody to replace them with, right? I just kind of had these rookies, and so then I took another huge risk by going on a difficult mission with a bunch of rookies and my last remaining unwounded, because I had 2 remaining unwounded soldiers. Who are high level or whatever, and they both died. I failed the mission. The countdown to the Avatar project was just ticking away, and I was just like, well, this is it, GG. So in my second run, what I did to change that was I didn't rush that tactics center, warfare center, or whatever, because I figured I'm going to let my guys be wounded, and the missions, I'm going to more evenly spread out the experience among these rookies, among these squaddies and everything. And what I did rush was the guerrilla combat center so that I could get the increase in squad sizes. And that has, so far, panned out pretty well. You and I remember when 2 of my highest level, one of my highest level specialist and my highest level psychic operative both died, but it's not the biggest thing in the world because I've got backups.
Yeah. Actually, this is funny. I'm hitting the point where, I just don't have a lot more soldiers because, in XCOM 1, that wasn't nearly as much of a concern. There was always kind of rookies somewhere. I don't actually know how to get rookies. How do I get more rookies?
Oh yeah, you recruit them. If you go to the armory, there's a little tab that's recruit. They're 25 supplies a piece, which is really balls. But I kind of lucked out in my run, and I guess I got some. I had to buy a few rookies, but I wasn't shelling out too much cash for rookies in this run. The other thing that was a huge luck out on my on this run was the placement of my facilities was much better. The power relays, those exposed Illyrium power cores, were in really good spots, and I was able to build a really efficient workshop, stuff like that. Which just wasn't possible in the first run because of just how everything was kind of set up.
Yeah, fair enough.
Honestly, we should probably just do I think I could make a whole thing out of XCOM. We should probably figure something out along those lines.
Maybe next week. I'll make sure to put the hours in this week. Maybe if I'm not busy playing Street Fighter V, which comes out tonight. That's recording. But the only other thing I have to mention is I played this little game called My Name is Mayo, which is this indie game. It's very, very stupid, but it was 60 cents, so I was okay with it. That kind of thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's literally a game that simulates the real life experience of clicking on or tapping a glass jar of mayonnaise. And you just click it a bunch, and it unlocks achievements, and those achievements tell a little story and dress up your mayo in different things like a mustache or a leopard bikini. So for 60 cents, I got about 30 minutes of enjoyment out of it, and I would if you really want to stretch it out, around 2,000 clicks, I got bored, so I downloaded an auto clicker. And I just kind of, experienced the story that way.
Wow, fair enough.
Yeah, 60 cents for 30 minutes though. That's a pretty good deal.
I guess that is true. But anyway, this is going to be another one of our Pathfinder episodes, D&D episodes in general, though I do kind of want to think about it in terms of Pathfinder because that's what's been on my mind. This is, of course, my topic, so I guess I'll introduce it. I've been thinking a lot about races in Pathfinder because, you guys were doing your, backstories and stuff, and I had that rule where, and this is a house rule, because a lot of the times in our games, just for the listeners out there, we house rule that, like, all races get a bonus feat, or, something, like lots of things kind of along those lines. And what we house ruled for my game was, at level 1, you got an extra, like, optional racial trait, or racial bonus feat that you qualify for, but it doesn't, like, replace anything, right? So, an orc could get sent, a half-orc could get sent, which I think replaces, something or whatever, but it doesn't, it doesn't get rid of his dark vision, for instance.
Keen Scent's actually a feat.
Is that what the one for the senses is?
Yeah, it's called Keen Scent. One of my players in Wrath of the Righteous took it for fun, so I know a little bit about it.
Fair enough. So I don't know. It's just got me thinking about kind of like what I feel like races are a very weird portion of Pathfinder. Something that hasn't quite been as like fully realized and upgraded and expanded upon in the same way that classes have been. Even though I really like alternate racial traits and they're kind of good design-wise, I kind of get this feeling that, like, races are fundamentally almost superfluous to the mechanics of the game, which really bugs me. I don't know. How do you have that feel? Do you have any strong feelings about how races interact with, the Pathfinder?
So, I get what you're feeling. And I get what you're saying, and that makes sense to me. I guess my deepest thought is something that's always kind of bothered me is, it's very hard to say, make something very atypical for a race. Like, I could accept, like a dwarven sorcerer, for instance, right? Like, it's very hard to make a dwarven sorcerer and not feel gimped by that restriction. And I believe that you could do, say, like, one where there wasn't not full optimization, right? Like, you don't necessarily need a race that has a bonus to charisma, but a race that has a penalty to charisma, you really can't play like any charisma based caster out of that. And that always kind of, and to the point where for like what was it? The Orc Witch Doctor archetype. They made an archetype that, in the first place, used to cast out of Constitution. They nerfed that to essentially, for all intents and purposes, it counts as 2 points higher to counteract that point. Like, this is obviously a thing that Paizo recognizes as being a thing.
Yeah, and I think, and that's a huge problem to a certain extent, and I think a lot of it is inherited from 3.5.
I agree.
Because I think 3.5, I think 3.5 is a pretty good system overall and everything, but there are a lot of pieces of it that are kind of like weirdly slapdash, and I think these races and these kind of racial conditions are similarly a little bit weird and a little bit slapdash. And unfortunately, like, the other half of it is, I feel like there are some traits, there are some racial traits that are really cool and really interesting, but some that are just kind of like, man, who the hell cares, right? I don't know how I feel that kind of stuff interacts with, like, I feel like I want races to be more mechanically, integrated into the game, right? I want somebody to pick a race, and have that race have like meaningful mechanics for them to be, working with or thinking about or working through. But at the same time, I also don't want someone to pick a race for its mechanics, right? Like, I don't want somebody to be like, well, I could play this, in my head, this is a human sorcerer, but elf just makes more sense, right? So
Yeah.
there's like a really weird middle ground to be found there that I think
Honestly,
is kind of awkward.
I think, kind of unfortunately that Pathfinder at the moment does the opposite of both of the things you want, right? Like they're not particularly mechanically interesting, but there are several choices that you have to make to get like an optimal thing out, right? Like
Yeah.
every wizard is either one of the races that gets an assignable +2 or like an elf or something where you're choosing the race because it gives you a bonus to the stat that you require on, but you don't really care about like I mean like there's some that are interesting, right? Like Keen Sen, even though you need a feat for it's pretty interesting. I always liked the idea of racial weapon familiarity. I thought that was always pretty cool.
Yeah, I really like racial weapon familiarity. I actually like a lot of it. It's funny because I actually like a lot of the alternate race stuff that they provide in, I guess, the ultimate race guide or something like that. The one where you build your own races, because we've done this, right? We've built a couple of homebrew races. Anybody that paid attention and tuned in for our Hell's Rebels game. Enoch is playing a Leonin, which is a race that I created about a year ago. And I created the Leonin entirely within Pathfinder's rules for, racial points and everything like that. And I was really surprised to see things like swim speeds and burrow speeds and climb speeds being actually relatively, like, low racial point modifiers, right? But they're not on any of, like, the big main races, It's not like I can play, I don't know, a gecko person who has a climb speed, right? It's not like I can play mermaid thing that has a swim speed, right? I don't know, man. It's just so weird. It's so strange.
I think part of that is a lot of the very core races, the big main races, are intentionally fairly generic, and something like a swim speed is something that you're paying for. And maybe there's an interesting story to be told about, say, like a frogman who has a swim speed journeying deep into the heartland or into like the desert to recover an artifact for his home or something. Like I think that's a compelling story, but it's also a hard thing to justify from a player perspective because you're never going to use that swim speed. The opportunity cost of what that swim speed requests is there, and and a lot of the aquatic races have things like you need to submerge yourself in water every so often. And that's just an extra burden on the player to play, which is, this is kind of harkens back to our talk about like playing disabled characters, in that like it's very hard I think for a lot of people to make not just an optimal choice but like a intentionally an intentionally hurting choice, a choice,
like an intentionally detrimental choice.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm totally in there. I'm totally with you. I don't know. It's funny because at the same time, Pathfinder has so many races,
Yeah.
and so many of them aren't, but many of them are not PC races, and to a certain extent, I actually kind of think it's a problem. Something I've done in Hell's Rebels is legit just edit out certain races that just like are like, why are these guys? I don't understand why these guys are scum. They should just be humans, right? Like it just makes no sense. It adds nothing. It's just like
what?
Scum. They're kind of like they're kind of like frog people, but like
yeah.
oceanic frog people. By the way, I haven't actually made that change because the scum are actually relatively unique, but there are some other changes that I have made. I'm just trying to not spoil anything. But that's the kind of point that I mean is I feel like some things are just like made another wacky race for no discernible reason. I don't know. And the other thing is I also kind of feel like racial identities in Pathfinder aren't as solid as they could or would or should be. Fourth edition has a lot of these problems to a certain extent, right? In that it's very clear which races are good for which classes. and you just shouldn't play a so the good thing about 4th edition is there are no negative traits, right? But obviously a dwarf that gets plus constitution plus wisdom is lending himself much more towards a cleric than he is towards a sorcerer, right? Who needs kind of neither of those two. But what I really enjoyed about 4th edition is that those racial identities were really set in stone, and you got it, right? You understood that, you know what? I'm playing a Dragonborn, and this is what Dragonborn are like, and here are some Dragonborn mechanics that interact with that stuff that I expect to see from them, right? The same thing with, elves, and I thought a really smart thing that they did was split up elves and Eladrin, so that you kind of had your, haughty arcane side of elves on one side, and then your wildy druidy kind of elves on the other. That's something that I'm a big proponent of.
Yeah,
but yeah.
See, I feel probably a little I don't know. Maybe this is more of my problem with kind of the standard fantasy setting kind of aspect that a lot of these places have, but I kind of prefer most of my races to be more like what humans are always described as, oh, they're so varied and they're fate's children and there's 1,000 billion different types of them and you can never describe a human universally type of thing. And I kind of like that idea, right? There are some good orcs and there are some bad orcs, not that they're all terrible people that live in this hole.
Sure.
If you see
okay.
one,
yeah.
you can shoot them on sight.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is also 4th edition didn't have civilization in the same way that Pathfinder did, so a lot of these things were kind of cultural shortcuts.
Okay.
If you come up on a band of dwarves, they're going to look like this, kind of in act kind of sort of in this way. But I think in Pathfinder you have so this is another problem. I think in Galarian specifically, everywhere is humans except for the Orc Nation and, the Elf Nation. And there isn't even really a Dwarf Nation. I guess the Five Kings Mountains kind of. But then, hardcore everywhere else is human. To the point that they added those, human sub-races, where there's Ulfin, who are the Nordic humans, and the Chelish humans, who kind of look Mediterranean. I don't know, man. All of this stuff kind of bugs me in such a weird way. I feel like there is something to be said for I kind of think. I'm trying to think of a good nation that would lend itself towards this. Varycia feels like an elven or a halfling nation to me. And I could see that, you know what I mean? I could see that be an elven or a halfling nation, but it's a human one by default. And those other races are, kind of fundamentally rare. And that's just, man, I don't know, that just rubs me the wrong way. It feels like a big missed opportunity, I think.
Yeah, no, I get that. I do. Again, I think I'd go the other way, where it's I agree with you that there's too much of an obsession, I think, in general in fantasy with humans being the special ones, because otherwise they're too plain. I guess there's not enough draw to play them or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the plainness of them is kind of a problem. I thought this is kind of another thing that I liked about 4th edition is that they did kind of stake out humans as their own thing. Because whereas you had because in 4th edition you had this ancient empire of Dragonborn or whatever that had crumbled and fallen, and now there's they're clearly in decline. Humans are the new guys on the street, but their empire hardcore just fell kind of thing. And I think that's an interesting interaction. It kind of put humans as the new kid on the block, kind of in a Mass Effect sense, right? Where it's not just they came out and they dominated everything forever. It's they were a part of the world, and then they beat down the Dragonborn, created their own people, kind of thing. Which I guess I kind of like a lot. I do get to what you're saying. I feel certain nations like Ustalav shouldn't necessarily be race, nation, right?
Actually, so I was actually going to comment that one of the things I kind of wish was more there is that the human ethnicities don't really have a lot of mechanical application to them, like you were saying, right? Like there's I think there's some interesting ground to go there. I think maybe for I don't know, probably for like political reasons, you don't kind of
you don't say that I don't even remember what the name is. Garundi? Are those the? Yeah, wow, we're getting into some awkward territory.
Yeah, no, you don't say that like the fantasy Asian race gets a +2 to wisdom or something. Like,
or they're getting better at math. Yeah, all of those like racial stereotypes, right? Because could you imagine though? Could you imagine if like Tion Shaw like a natural +2 on appraise checks? It's just like God. But it's funny because that stuff is so commonplace with these fantasy races, right?
Right, but it's fine when it's an elf or a dwarf because they're not,
they're not real. Yeah, that is true. That is certainly true. I mean, hey, man, to get like, there's even more racial politics at play because humans are like default white. Yeah, I guess Grundy exists or whatever, but they are. If I were to just say, oh, he's a human wizard, yeah, you'd be thinking of a white guy in your brain.
It's especially for where most of the adventures take place.
Yeah, I guess that's just that's not a racism thing. It's just like it's kind of on the line from like a racially kind of political perspective.
Also, not to dig too far into it, but like if you told me you were playing a human wizard, I would think that wizard is white. But if like I don't know. I always assume that the player and the character are of the same gender and ethnicity, so long as they don't specify otherwise.
Yeah.
I think that's just a default easy shortcut for.
In fact, so it's kind of funny that this came up because I'm kind of like in a weird way beating around my own bush about it. Something that occurred to me in the context of Hell's Rebels is. So kind of going back to that whole speech with Barzillai Thrun is really important to me, and I made some changes like the protest, where the protest doesn't turn into the riot. I didn't like that interaction because it specifically it does a couple of things, and I can come back and address some of them. But the important one for this thing about races is it gives you guys a cover. It gives more of a cover to avoid the ire of Barzillai Thrun. One of the big problems with the Hell's Rebels adventure path, kind of like from a narrative perspective, and I don't mind spoiling this because I'm not using it because it's fucking stupid, is Barzillai Thrun knows who you are from the get-go. He knows that you're rebels, and he knows that you're like plotting against him, but he does nothing because, as the books say, quote unquote, he doesn't want to lend legitimacy to you guys or whatever. And I hate that. I think that's so fucking stupid. It's like defanging, it's like defanging this villain who's obviously supposed to be hunting you guys down and tracking you down, and it removes kind of that like that animosity of, well, how secretive do we want to be? Do we want to make a big splash? Do we want to keep things under the radar kind of thing? But so one of the things I was thinking about was I was like, okay, so Barzillai Thrun doesn't know who these people are, and it takes like part of the tension is he going to figure it out, right? Is he going to be able to figure out that you guys are the leaders of this rebel group and successfully assassinate, and come after you, or are you going to be able to like keep it secret? But then I was just kind of like thinking about like the mechanics of this prison break, and I was like, well, let's think about it, right? A Leonin, an elf, a half-orc, and 2 humans break out of prison together, right? And then, and then wandering around Kintargo is this group of a Leonin, an elf, a half-orc, and 2 humans, you know what I mean? Like, it is just, I was just like, oh, God, this is such a problem in my brain, like, because...
Which is probably why they even though I will agree with you that seems like a bad justification, it's probably why they wrote the justification in the first place type of deal.
Yeah,
right?
I definitely, yep. I'm definitely with you on that perspective. I mean, the part that I've come down to is because the protest just dissipates, right? Bars Lytherin comes out. The other thing is Bars Lytherin's speech as written was garbage. Like, it was straight. It was garbage. He was just a huge condescending douchebag, and then he writes an 8th proclamation that has nothing to do with anything. And it's supposed to incite the right. It's supposed to show you that he's willing to, that he's willing to just kind of make these decisions on the fly, and that he's kind of like petty and everything like that. But I was like, why on earth? The specific proclamation bans ship captains from setting foot in Kintargo. They have to stay on their ship unless they're native Kintargans. And I was like, what does that have to do with anything? Right? Like, why wouldn't he just stop their ability to, assemble? Why wouldn't he just outlaw all protests forever? Which is obviously why I made that change. But yeah, so by making the protests not turn into a riot, it actually gives an impression that it's fine, that it's working, that nobody is fighting against him. And so he doesn't necessarily know to look for you in the same way that, this giant riot broke out on my front fucking lawn. Well, I guess it's time to go to every radical coffee house in the town and just murder everybody in there. You know what I mean? Like, he's not looking for you because he doesn't think that there's a problem.
Yeah, well, I feel that. I'm gonna let you know though that when he was like, when he was like, this proclamation takes effect in 15 minutes is what you said.
Yeah,
I was very strongly considering having the personality of Schmitty yell, well, it sounds like we got 14 minutes to riot, boys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the other half of that is that it's meant. So the other part that bugged me about it was if the riot just starts out of nowhere, it's kind of like, why do you need the Silver Ravens? You know what I mean? Like, why do you need these heroes to come and start this rebel group if they're just willing to if they're willing to just throw down from the fucking get-go? And so I think that, saying, hey, these are what the people of Kintargo are like. They're scared. They're confused. They're not brave, and they're not going to go, they're not going to do it themselves. You need to be the leaders for them to follow. I think that's really compelling. Which is these are all now we've come into why did the director's cut? Why did I make all of these changes? Well, those are the reasons. But yeah, so I was just thinking about from the racial perspective of of course anybody would be able to put together, anybody would be able to put together that you guys are the ones from the prison, though.
Wait, who knows that we all escaped though?
Nobody. This is why we burned the files.
Okay.
This is why that they're just random mercenaries instead of being actual Dotari guards. Because these are all steps that I have consciously implemented to obfuscate the connection between you guys and everything like that.
To allow us essentially be anonymous Kickstarters of the revolution, essentially.
Right. And honestly, it's also a big gameplay thing because there's a rebellion statistic called notoriety. And as written, when you get to a certain amount of notoriety, it just kind of off-screen punishes you for it. And so I've just done away with that system. You guys need to watch your notoriety or shit goes down,
the Advent soldiers will start murdering civilians.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, but that's a real concern.
No, I mean that makes sense.
Figure
right?
out where you guys.
Mechanic.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is, right? That they figure out where a safe house is, that they attack one of your prominent supporters. Those things are things that you're going to need to manage, and in the same way that in XCOM, right, you kind of have to, sometimes you need to pick your battles, right? Like sometimes you're going to say, you know what, the right thing to do is to bust into this prison and save this person right, who got arrested for no good reason, but that is just way too high profile for us. We're going to have to let them, we're going to have to let them sit it out, right? We're going to have to let this guy get strung up in square, and maybe he's going to get executed, but what are we going to do? Bust out in the middle of the public square in the middle of an execution? We just can't afford that because it'll doom everything. Huh. I think that tension is really important.
No, it does. And I am eager to see how you handle that, because part of the I guess kind of the base assumption with a lot of D&D is you can always do the thing, right? Like if you put like the execution of an innocent in the square, like most players will be like, well, obviously we're supposed to interrupt it.
Yeah, yep. This is exactly the kind of thing that I wanted to. That principle is something I want to mess with a little bit, because I don't, you guys are gonna have to make some hard choices, and that's part of the point.
Interesting. I'm excited, but we've gotten a little bit off topic.
Yeah, we did get a little off topic. Races. Pathfinder. It's funny because I actually think that there are other RPGs that do it better. Something that I liked a lot about the Star Wars RPG is they have species, but the species are very mechanically light. They in a typical 3-5 way, they have pluses, they have minuses, but it seems like there's less power in the kind of superfluous stuff. Rhodians, who are the Greedo. Yeah. Greedo is a Rhodian. Rhodians are natural. That their society is very very hunter based, and a lot of people are hunters. So they just get track at level 1. They get track. They have +2 dex, +2 whatever, right? And that's their race. But it was really nice because when we were playing it, it allowed all of us to be just you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I've never seen Ithorians look cool. I'm gonna play a fucking Ithorian, that kind of thing. And because Star Wars is Star Wars, and you walk into the cantina and there's just a million guys of a million different races there. It was always kind of fine. It was never a weird thing to say like, oh, what is this Leonin doing in Kintargo, right? That kind of question never comes up because it's the Star Wars universe where everything is really, really integrated. Man, I don't know. See, part of me thinks that that's the best way to do it, but part of me also just kind of likes to a certain extent.
I also think there's other things you like. I feel like you can go all the way in the other way, where races give you some set of mechanical benefits, but none of them are make your spell casting better, right? It's things it's things that will give you the flavor of the race without directly kind of making it an optimal choice, right? I think something like racial spells works well for this kind of flavor if you can build up I don't think there are enough of them, and there's not enough assigned for the individual races for it to work as well as I would like it to in Pathfinder. But the kind of idea that the goblins are a very fire-based tribe, so they've got greater access to fire magic, and maybe if you want to, that'll influence your decision if you want to play some sort of fire caster or whatever, which I recognize is kind of a very core.
That's kind of interesting because something else I hate about races is per day uses of stuff. I like it in the context. I actually think 4E is very good at it because they're very. First of all, that game is all about per use of stuff, so it feels much more natural. And second of all, they were very kinds of hands-offish things, like Elven Accuracy, where you re-roll a missed attack roll once per encounter. That doesn't announce itself in the same way that I'm a tiefling and I can just cast this spell, but I can only do it once. You know what I mean? That just feels weird. But Elven Accuracy, in the mind's eye of a flow of battle, I don't actually really see that happen. I don't really see that go off in the same way.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of along the lines of what I'm talking about. These make it
I feel that.
And I think kind of from like an even larger perspective, I think that's I think we're associating this with race because this is where a lot of these things ride. But I think Exaday powers are actually like I think a naturally better feeling system is X per encounter rather than X a day, because there's always, I think, this kind of like this kind of desire to kind of like hold on to things until you know you're going to need it, which is kind of a hard thing to judge.
Yeah, that stuff really bugs me. It also really bugs me because I can't help but be narcissistic about it. It also really bugs me in the context of Hell's Rebels because most of the missions that you do are very small scale, but they're per day, right? So it feels weird kind of making these encounters and everything, but it's like, you know, this isn't a game about dungeons, but Pathfinder feels balanced around dungeons,
right?
And so I kind of fear a point where we get to, you walk into the warehouse that you're supposed to raid for supplies, and the Arcanist blows all of his level 5. He blows 3 level 5 spells in a row, and it's all over. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. That kind of thing is kind of is frightening almost from a balance perspective, and I think per encounter is the. Yeah, I'm with you. I like per encounter way better.
Yeah, and it also like from the other side of that looking glass, which is players conserving resources, players feeling good about using their resources, right? Like it's if every player has had that moment where it's like, well, I could use my lightning bolt here, but it's the only one I have, and what if we run into a boss later or something like that?
Yeah, I know. I totally know that feeling.
And I that can be like, I guess, like an interesting thing to play with in some ways, but I feel like as much as 4th E gets crap, and I think it did some of that stuff well. It's like, well, yeah, like you could do like 1 or 2 of those things that have like this daily cycle on it, because that lets you have something that's like much bigger that feels impactful. But if you have most of the power concentrated in per encounter things, then the players can spend their resources and not feel too bad about it.
Yeah, I really like that about 4th edition. I also really like in 4th edition that there were rituals, which were kind of spells and stuff that you cast outside of like a per day context. Something that bugs me a lot about Pathfinder in that way is that like there's not a big place for, like a level 12 wizard can cast teleport, right? But 20 level 1 wizards working together can't. And that kind of bugs me in a weird way. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that should be a thing, right? Like I feel like, maybe
they kind of introduced those things in the Psionics handbook, right? Or occult adventures,
you mean
rather.
Yeah, in occult. Yeah, those are the occult rituals, and I do like those a lot, and I have wholeheartedly adopted those into kind of like my lexicon of rules in order to like describe this stuff. But yeah, like that just that really bugs me in a certain sense, and I don't know. I like that. I like that a lot. In a weird way, I feel like this kind of stuff is going to be the death of Pathfinder. Is like because this is such a it's such a huge foundation of the whole system, right? But it's inherited from 3.5, and it's not really as well thought out as it could be necessarily.
Yeah, I think that'll probably be a thing that gets, or rather, I would hope that that's a thing that gets changed whenever Pathfinder 2 happens, because that's got to happen at some point, right? They can't just keep stacking rules on top of rules forever.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's kind of
to bring this back to a second, and I think those kinds of daily, those kinds of encounter things for races is a pretty okay way to go about it.
I think it's an excellent way to go about it, right? Like you can get a lot of flavor and a lot of utility into those things that don't necessarily feel like, well, this one is better. there will always be some. I'm hesitating because there will always be some nerd out there that's going to be like, well, statistically, re-rolling your attack's always going to be better than adding a fire damage or something, right? Like, but they are not such big things that a person more interested in playing a compelling story would feel a detriment from taking a different one.
I mean, I just think it's kind of comparable to the regular kind of passive bonuses or whatever, like passive effects that we typically see. Orc Ferocity does the same job as trancing for an elf, right?
Sure.
From like that flavor perspective. And I also kind of think that. See, the other thing is, like, this is a kind of a weird thing about passive bonuses. I feel like passives are a little bit crazy in this, like, the context of they apply, like, they because they apply all the time on certain stuff, their power budget has to be tiny compared to, like, per day power budget stuff. I created a campaign trait for Charles. I created this campaign trait for Charles because he's from, a magical academy where he studied magic. And so the campaign trait is once per day, when he uses spellcraft to correctly identify a spell cast on him, he can elect to choose +2 on any saves related to that spell, right? That is a powerful effect. That's a big effect, right? But it's got a lot of barriers because you can only use it once per day. You have to succeed on the skill check kind of thing. It has to be applicable in this certain way, right? If the spell doesn't require or demand a save, you could be SOL. And I think, in a way, I think that campaign trait is better than you get +1 on stealth checks, and stealth is always a class skill for you, because it's more impactful than that, but it's also worse than that because, like, there's so much kind of downtime on it.
Yeah, so this is actually something that they kind of move into the traits space for a moment. It's always bothered me about traits is, like, because the skills being the way they are, right? Like, if you want a skill that's not typical for your class, the best way to get that into, get that sweet +3 is with a trait, but it kind of forces you to make decisions like, do you want a very mechanically useful trait, or do you want a cool trait, where a cool trait is, like one of the ones that's like, you can if you're a blacksmith, you can use your tools as weapons without penalty. I think that's a really cool trait. But if I was...
Yeah, this is actually a super cool trait.
But if I was playing, say, like... If I was playing a barbarian that wanted profession, I'd take the profession trait because that's, the even from a role-playing perspective, that's usually the better choice. Because I'm usually taking the skill trait to augment something that is weird, and something that makes the character a little bit more unique.
That's totally true. I mean, I took a stealth trait on Kenzo because I wanted Kenzo to be stealthy, but Samurai doesn't have stealth in class. That's totally applicable, I suppose.
To kind of bring it back to races, something that I've thought about for a while, kind of in like. And kind of like what I would design if I were making just with no concern for complication. Something that I'd like to do is something like a differentiation between, like a hard differentiation between what are social traits and what are like inherent traits, right? Like, with the example being something like, an elf gets weapon familiarity because he was raised in an environment where he would have been taught those things. That's like a social thing, like a society-based trait. Mm-hmm. Whereas something like the stat adjustments are supposed to be something that's inherent to the DNA of
right. Like elves getting pluses on perception is because their ears are just finer tuned than human ears.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
I feel that. I think that would be pretty sweet. I could see a big divide along those lines that allows for more interesting. That allows for kind of more interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Something that we did when we were designing for Rycerin, which is kind of like our homebrew campaign setting that we've been like off and on playing with for forever, is we had different kind of like sub races, you know. So I had the Leonin, right? You know, there are these lion people, but there were Savannah Leonin, who were the plains striding, you know, golden-haired one. Highlands Leonin, who lived in the mountains and had black manes. And then Outsiders, who lived outside of, like, the kind of ubiquitous Leonin hierarchy, empire, nation-state. And they all had different, you know, kind of traits for those reasons. And I think that was a pretty interesting, straightforward way to break up the, you know, so you could choose one way or the other. We also did that with the Yukari, which were kind of the lizard folk, crocodile people. There were the Yukari that lived on the islands, who had a swim speed, the Yukari that lived in the jungles, who had a climb speed, and the Yukari that lived in the desert, who had a burrow speed. And I thought that, you know, like, that stuff is so... I don't know. I really like that. I thought that was a neat interaction.
And with the society stuff, the reason I think, or something that I thought would be, like, you know, in my infatigable search for greater complexity, something like, you know, what if you had, say, a dwarf that was raised by elves for some reason, right? Like, it makes sense for the dwarf to have, like, like, have a higher constitution, but he probably learned how to use a long sword and a bow, in that situation, type of deal. And there's the obvious pitfalls of there. It's like, well, then everybody wants to be like the X from Y with L parentage, but I think that's an okay trade-off.
Yeah, it's always tough to balance around this kind of stuff from like a min-max perspective.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Something that I had some trouble with, kind of like designing in that space was, for the rebellion, you guys are hiring teams, right? So you recruit a bunch of people that are good at this thing, and teams range from anywhere from kind of, like sneaky spies to merchants. You can have merchants on your payroll, to kind of demagogue, preachery people, right? And in RP, those teams are going to be represented by team leaders, right? People, individuals, NPCs with names and personalities and everything. And I was sitting there and I was like, this kind of specifically came up because I was giving them all chaotic neutral as alignment. I was like, fuck this is fucking stupid. So I really like went crazy with alignments, and I was like, oh, well, this guy is, you know, he's kind of a dick, so he's neutral evil, right? You know, like, oh, this guy is, this guy is a really nice guy, so he's lawful good, right? And I kind of wanted that stuff to play into it, but then I was like, well, they're never going to take an evil guy, right? They're never going to take the guy that's evil over the guy that's lawful good, because they just wouldn't be able to trust the chaotic evil guy over the lawful good guy. And I was like, well, how can I balance that out? And I was like, well, maybe I'll give them traits. Maybe I'll give them like actual like little mechanical bonuses on like, oh, this guy's really good at interceptor missions or whatever, and then, you know, you can give the slightly better traits to the evil guys so that there's a little bit of a trade-off there. And then I just kind of like, I realized that I had like brainstormed myself into this really weird place that I wanted you guys to choose NPCs for this based on their personalities, but I was just designing them so that you choose them based on their mechanics. And I was like, well, you know, we could just... I'm just gonna have to trust that you guys are gonna be okay about it.
You know what the easiest way to kind of do that is you don't tell us what their alignments are.
I know that is, but the thing is, I really like that idea. I really like the idea of you guys having like arguments a little bit. And this is something that I've like engendered basically in the entire game, is where, like, you know, because I want you to, like, you know, fight about stuff, and I want somebody to say, you know what, we need to take Bliggity Blorp, the lawful good paladin, because Smagoobity the chaotic evil rogue is just, he's going to betray us. I don't trust that guy. And I think having that argument is good and is interesting. But yeah, I know you're right.
Yeah, I think the problem you might eventually run into is that like somebody's gonna say we need to use bloogity blorp instead of smiggity because he's lawful good. Everybody's gonna be like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's exactly what I fear. Maybe the best way to do this would be to just write out the alignment until you hire them. I like the idea that like you bring them on and then you find out, oof, this guy's chaotic evil. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But honestly, how that works for you guys is also kind of up to you. Because it's one of those things that could be like 5 seconds where it's like, here are your 3 choices. I bring up these little, the little blurbs. You read a little bit about their backstory and are like, I choose you. Or it can be something as intensive as like, let's sit these guys down and have a job interview. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be down for that, I guess. I didn't necessarily expect that to happen, but designing games is hard.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm sorry. I had a follow-up, but I didn't actually have a follow-up. There was something in my head, and I was like, wait, what am I talking about? I feel like, really what I was going to say is I feel like other games do this. I feel like because we're looking at it from, like, hardcore game design, hardcore, like, game theory almost places, it's almost, like, not useful. Because, there's one thing where, like, you're assuming a rational actor, right? But then there's another thing when you're, like, assuming that the rational actor is going to make detrimental, or is going to make certain choices, just kind of because of these, like, mechanics rather than going forward with it because of, RP stuff, right? I actually kind of feel like, even though we're complaining about it a lot, and I think that we're right in the sense of the game design theory says that it works this way. I actually think that in general, people respond to it and they just, if I want to play a dwarf, I play a fucking dwarf. If I want to play a half-orc, I play a half-orc and I don't worry about it. The reason I thought about this was because of Skyrim, because you choose your race in Skyrim and they all have these different mechanics, but I didn't min-max my Skyrim race. I just played an Imperial and then I played a Nord because I wanted to. I don't know.
I think there is like a limit to how far you will push that though, right? Like I do think that like one, there's a certain type of player, and two, there's I think a person will play a dwarf if they want to play a dwarf, but I don't think anybody plays a dwarf sorcerer, right? Like I bring this up because this is something I've kind of like this is always kind of my thing to think about. Is like if I wanted to run a dwarf sorcerer, like the only way to do that is to get like the wisdom bloodline, which is like not boring, and then very min-maxy.
The kind of counterpoint to that is I think of it as being I honestly kind of think that it's like it's almost an edge case, because I think I think you very much could play a dwarf wizard, right?
Sure.
And like, yeah, there's a flavor difference between the two, right? But yeah, I mean, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that elves don't make the best tanks, and so if you're gonna play an elf fighter, you probably want to focus in on two-handed, two-weapon fighting, or you want to focus. I mean, you can even an elf fighter could play like a hardcore tank and spank build. They would just have to kind of compensate more for it by pumping their decks and trying to be a dodge tank or something. You know what I mean, like kind of something along those lines.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So the difference here for me is that like a dwarf wizard is non-optimal but doable. I don't think a dwarf sorcerer is even like nearly doable in that sort of sense.
But I kind of feel like that might be the only one.
Or you don't think there are other examples of this?
Well, I almost kind of feel like it only works that way for Dwarf Sorcerer because spellcasting is so intrinsically tied to the charisma stat for a sorcerer.
Yeah, well, any
like
spellcasting class can't be played by a class with a penalty in that category.
Are there other classes that have penalties in
of the core?
I guess that's really what I'm thinking. I don't think
you couldn't play an elf kineticist.
I guess that's fair. That's kind of related.
That kind of thing, right? Or you can't play an orc. Most spellcasters, you can't play. I don't know. You're right though. In core, there's not a lot of mental minuses, as it were. And so it's
and it is one of those things where even though there's a -2 strength on a halfling, you can still play effective paladin, fighter,
sure,
blood rager builds that don't rely on it. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like part of me thinks because as soon as I thought about that Skyrim thing, it made me feel like I was overthinking it. It made me feel like we were kind of overthinking.
But I think so. Part of what makes Skyrim different, part of this is this problem that was very visible in Mark's old Runelords game, which is that if you have players at vastly different power levels, it doesn't work, right? Like for every you that's willing to play a dwarf sorcerer regardless of the fact that it's gonna hurt a little bit. There's if you're playing with a Nick who is gonna optimize everything out the ass, you're not gonna have as fun a time in that game because you've got somebody who's always winning. Who's solo, because you can't tune the encounters to that party because then the power gamer ends up winning the encounter all the time, and you can't tune it to the power gamer because then the rest of the party just feels ineffective. It's a weird problem.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Though I wonder how much of that power budget, because we're assuming there's a big differential between the power gamer and the other people, right? How much of that budget is a racial thing versus how much of that budget is classes?
So I think straight up, actually, if I'm gonna, if you get rid of the ability bonuses, like straight up, it's all gone. I think, like, honestly, this just occurred to me, but I think it'd be really interesting to play. Like, I can hear the sirens in the background.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been trying. I've been hoping that maybe if I stay silent, we can just edit it out. Don't worry about it. This is this is what happens when you live where I live, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's fine. But like, I feel like it'd be really interesting to play a game of Pathfinder where the races are all the same except no one gets any ability but modifiers or something.
I actually think you could do it where you do it like the human way, where like everybody gets a +2.
Sure,
I think that would be super doable. Wow, I actually kind of think that would be kind of so perfect. Jeez.
Well, we solved it.
Yeah. No more worries about races. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Yeah, I do kind of agree with you. At the same time, to be honest, something that I did sort of in the Rysarian stuff because I did 3 in that. I did Gossaمیtes, who were basically like sentient elementals who had to wrap themselves in these crazy. They're just like elemental energy that's constantly siphoning out to another plane, so they had to wrap themselves in these special bandages, so they walk around kind of like the ethereals from World of Warcraft. They're almost like mummies, to be honest. You have the Gossaمیtes, you have the Leonin, and you have the Yukari, and they were all built for, like, the Leonin are better cavaliers than humans, right? Like, they're built for that to a certain extent because they have these special interactions with charging and stuff like that. But I also like the interaction was so small that I don't think anybody would have been penalized if they were playing a Leonin cleric, right? Like just because they had that one racial trait that says on a charge you get effectively plus 10 movement speed. It's not the end of the day. It's not like that's a bad thing, and I think that's a little bit more in line with this kind of Skyrim thing that I was thinking about, right? Where it's just like,
well, when everything's a bonus, it's much easier to forgive.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's certainly the way. Yeah, yep. That's how I feel about it. I also think that it's nice because it also allows you to kind of create like broad strokes racial identities, right? I think it makes sense for elves to have primarily, you know what I mean? Like the idea that elves racially, like the elf nation, its army is primarily guerrilla ranger bow troops, right? Makes a lot of sense because they get pluses, they get a plus to dex and they have this weapon familiarity or whatever. Whereas Leonin, who are better at charging or whatever, are more suited to kind of shock troops. And you can kind of flavor the culture of these guys a bit around that, which I think is effective. I think that's good in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Man, I really do wish I had done that now. I think that would have been so great. It's such a great fix to like all of these problems in my head.
Well, there's always next time, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I feel I feel like home rules, like homebrew stuff. It's almost like necessary to a certain extent because I think it's important for I think it's important for GMs to GM what they're most comfortable doing, and that embracing some house rules, foregoing others, is a good way to it's a good way to do that, I guess.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah. I guess a lack of house rules is also its own style almost.
Yeah, and like Pathfinder Society and the like, where you follow the rules because that's how you ensure kind of a consistent play for it. That's I think ultimately a lot of the problem is like, maybe not a lot of the problem, but part of the problem is that D&D is a very with your friends type of activity, but there's a lot of effort by the companies that produce these types of games to make them in some way a little bit more universal, and because of that, you want a set of rules that applies consistently across everything for those types of situations.
Man, that is a really interesting point. How do I feel about that? See, because I definitely agree to a certain extent. Man, yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's tough because you're handing it's because it almost feels like those are two different games at that point, right? Like Pathfinder Society is basically a different version of Pathfinder than the Pathfinder that that you play when you play in a campaign with people, and I don't think that's that's not a minor thing. That's like real.
Yeah, no, it's yeah.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's. I see. Part of me thinks that the games don't. It's not a big deal that they're not 1-to-1, but part of me thinks that they kind of should be a little bit more 1-to-1 to a certain extent. I in a weird way, I almost kind of I don't know enough about Pathfinder Society actually to really make any claim one way or the other. So that's a lie. Don't listen to me, folks at home. I'm a liar. that was not a real point I was making. It was stupid.
Okay then.
You're welcome.
To kind of bring it back a little bit, I was actually just kind of thinking about this. It's like, back to the point about like eliminating ability scores fixes a lot of the problems. I think it's definitely true for core, but it you need to more finely adjust it outside of core races. Just to kind of bring that up.
What do you mean?
Like, I think that some races get some power allotted in like spell-like abilities and other types of traits that gets paid for by larger penalties. In their like they get paid for in their ability scores, actually
example.
Like what like can
Tieflings or
the little dragon things, like kobolds.
Oh. Okay.
Kobolds are actually terrible. In term I think if you build them out with the race builder, they get like 6 race points, but they get like hold on one second. Let me look it up.
They have 5. Apparently on the SRD they have 5
race.
RP.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
And they get like minus 4
Jesus.
strength, minus 2 con, and plus 2 dex.
Oh wow. Get natural armor.
Yeah, and you could build some things around that, but like I am sure that there is another race out there that that pays for their power with different ability score modifiers, or maybe not, and maybe I'm crazy, because if you get rid of that line, that minus 3 race point cost, and replace it with what is it? It's like called flexibility in the race builder. You probably have a 10-point race and everything's fixed. So maybe I'm wrong.
Have you ever seen Drow Nobles are 41 race points?
I don't think
because they have an at-will spelling. What at-will spelling ability do they have? God damn.
Probably like darkness or something.
Yeah, that's probably true. Something like ridiculous like that.
But yeah.
Oh wow, it's detect magic actually.
Wait, what? That gets them 16 fucking points?
It's detect magic at will, and then featherfall and levitate as spell-like abilities once per day. And you have to take a racial feat for it.
I think Paizo values those too much. Like, detect magic at will is something I'd give a player as like a trait. Like,
really?
It's for any caster.
I mean, it's a cantrip, so
yeah, for any caster,
it's kind of like whatever.
Yeah, that is exactly my point, right? Like, there's nothing so special about being a caster that giving a non-caster a cantrip at will for a trait is a huge deal to me. Like, rogues can use a rogue talent to get a level 0 spell as an at will ability, so that's a feat. So maybe trait's a little bit cheap, but there is no cantrip out there, specifically cantrip out there, that I would feel would break the game by giving it to a player at will, even for free, even like.
Yeah, I can't really think of any, to be honest. Jeez. I don't know. Well, I guess we've kind of gotten to the end of that whole idea. It's interesting because I want to, I do want to go back to like Rycerin, and I want to make more races. I like making races, and I think they're cool and interesting and fun to kind of. But I think they're a little bit more fun from almost a cultural perspective than they are from like a purely quote unquote biological perspective, which is most of what gets statted up. I feel like. Because besides weapon familiarity kind of stuff, I feel like most races are statted up. I don't know, by their biology.
Yeah. Just to kind of finish out the conversation about with the kobolds, which was my point about paying for things with other points. If you get rid of the ability and replace it with human heritage, which is 0 RP, you get an 8 RP race, which I think is that's not too weak to be reasonable.
Yeah. Yep. I definitely agree. Well, I guess that's the end of it. I don't have any other points to make.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think we've talked about it a bunch.
I also feel good about. I like where we ended up.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it takes a little bit less time.
Yeah, sometimes it takes tangents into Hell's Rebels to get there.
Absolutely,
that happens. And XCOM.
Yeah, but if you at home think that we're wrong, which who knows, you can email us at somederpsplaygames@gmail.com. There'll be or comment on our Hell's Rebels stream, or comment on this track. Who knows? Let us know. Please. Anybody comment, please. But yeah, we're doing Hell's or Rise of the Rune Lords on Mondays, Hell's Rebels Wednesdays. I've stopped trying to align it to the weeks because the episodes always come out after we know.
Yeah, that is actually super true.
What is it? Shadowrun should start up at some point, and
are you going to stream any XCOM? I told myself I was going to stream XCOM, but I never got around to it.
I don't think I'll stream XCOM. I might stream some Street Fighter at some point, just because I like Street Fighter. I might do that on the group channel. I might do it on my own channel. We'll talk about that in the future. But we will definitely be streaming some Dungeons and some Dragons.
Yes, that is certainly true. So I guess pay attention. Look out for that. We'll be out there. Yeah. Okay.
Until next time.
Until next time, dear listeners.
Bye.
The dirtiest outro.